When obsession replaces purpose, sanity becomes the first casualty. Chosen ones, let's not sugarcoat it. Somebody out there has been tangled up in your life like a bad Netflix series they can't stop binge watching. Except this isn't entertainment. This is intrusion. Studies show that obsession literally alters brain chemistry, releasing the same stress hormones that long-term trauma does. Imagine that, just by living your life, you've turned someone else's nervous system into a war zone. But here's the twist. What started as curiosity about you spiraled into meddling, and that meddling became an addiction. They thought watching you, controlling you, or interfering with your journey would bring them power. Instead, it brought them paranoia, sleepless nights, and more breakdowns than their internet connection during a storm. The suspense is this. They tried to write your story, only to erase themselves from their own. And now, their obsession has become the very trap they can't escape. Stay with me, because the layers we're about to peel back will show you why their madness isn't random. It's the natural consequence of touching what God set apart. Number one, they tried to rewrite your story and ended up erasing themselves. They tried to rewrite your story and ended up erasing themselves. That's the kind of madness obsession breeds. It convinces people that they have the authority to pick up your pen and dictate the chapters of your life. They wanted to control your outcomes, define your identity, and even decide your limits. But in doing so, they neglected their own story completely. Their time, their energy, their creativity, their opportunities, all wasted on you. While you kept moving, they kept plotting. While you built, they obsessed. While you stayed rooted, they spun in circles. Obsession blinds people to themselves. It consumes their thoughts until they no longer know who they are outside of your existence. Every failure of yours that they waited for never came, but every moment they lost watching you pile up into years they can't get back. That is the tragedy of obsession. It robs people of their own destiny while they're busy trying to tamper with yours. They wanted to edit your chapters, but the ink was invisible, because God doesn't hand out authority over chosen lives to human hands. The more they meddled, the more they dissolved. Think about it. They thought sabotaging you would make them look powerful, but in the process, they exposed their weakness. They thought spreading lies about you would give them influence, but it only made them look bitter and obsessed. They thought controlling your path would bring them closer to success, but all it did was distance them from their own. The harder they tried to define you, the more undefined they became. It's almost poetic. The erasure they planned for you was the mirror of their own downfall. There's something brutally honest about how life balances itself. You can't waste your entire existence meddling in another person's calling and expect your own to flourish. Their madness isn't just emotional, it's spiritual bankruptcy. Their story is blank now, because while you were writing with divine ink, they were scribbling in the margins of your life, leaving nothing meaningful on their own pages. In the end, you didn't even need to fight them. Their obsession fought them for you. They thought they were authoring your end, but really, they were scripting their own disappearance. Number two, they studied you until they stopped recognizing themselves. They studied you until they stopped recognizing themselves. What started as mild curiosity became an all-consuming fixation. They weren't just looking at your life anymore, they were dissecting it, analyzing your choices, your movements, your patterns, trying to decode what made you different. They thought that by studying you they could gain insight, leverage, or even some form of control, but obsession is a slow poison. The more they focused on you, the more their own identity dissolved, their dreams, their values, their goals, all slowly blurred, because everything they did began to revolve around you. This is the silent danger of obsession. It masquerades as interest, but it's actually self-erasure. They lost the rhythm of their own life because they were so busy memorizing the rhythm of yours. They forgot their own passions because they were trying to copy yours. They forgot their own voice because they were echoing yours. They forgot their own mirror because they were staring into yours. And when the day came that they looked inward, they no longer recognized who was staring back at them. That's not just unhealthy, that's spiritual decay. In trying to understand you, they became unrecognizable to themselves. They built a false version of you in their mind, a character they could obsess over. But no human can live inside a fantasy without breaking. Every time reality contradicted the story they'd created about you, it caused them stress, paranoia, even anger. They were no longer studying you, they were studying a figment of their own obsession, and in that process they lost their anchor. It's a cruel irony. They wanted to gain power over you, but they gave all their power away to the fixation itself. They wanted to unmask you, but ended up unmasking their own emptiness. They became a stranger in their own life because they made you the center of it. That's why their mental and emotional stability began to unravel. You didn't even have to retaliate. The cost of their obsession was self-destruction. By studying you instead of living their own truth, they turned themselves into a shadow, present but hollow, active but lost. In the end, they weren't just obsessed with you. They were consumed by their own inability to find themselves anymore. Number 3, they wanted to own what could never belong to them. They wanted to own what could never belong to them. That's the root of their madness. They weren't satisfied with watching you succeed or even envying you from a distance. They wanted to take possession of what makes you who you are. They wanted your essence, your gift, your spirit, as if these were objects that could be stolen, bottled, or copied. But here's the reality. Chosen ones cannot be possessed. You are not an item to be collected. You are a soul with divine backing. And the attempt to claim you is what broke them, because obsession with the unattainable always leads to ruin. They thought your strength could be duplicated if they mimicked your steps. They thought your favor could be hijacked if they interfered in your path. They thought your identity could be diminished if they controlled how others perceived you. But they forgot something fundamental. What is breathed into you by God cannot be touched by human hands. Trying to own your essence was like trying to chain the wind or cage fire. It doesn't work. And in their repeated failure, frustration turned into rage, and rage fermented into madness. Ownership is about control, and that's exactly what they wanted over you. They wanted to dictate your choices, limit your options, and regulate your growth. But chosen ones are not designed to be domesticated. Your very existence resists control. The more they pushed, the more you slipped through their grip. That resistance is what drove them to the edge, because obsession thrives on illusion. And every time you broke the illusion of their control, their mind cracked a little more. They couldn't accept that you are not just a person, you are a vessel. And vessels of light cannot be owned, only honored. Their failure to honor you left them in conflict with something greater than themselves. That's why they began unraveling. It wasn't just you they couldn't control. It was the fact that they tried to dominate something sacred. That kind of arrogance always backfires. In the end, their madness is the direct result of trying to possess the unpossessable. They thought they could reduce you to property, but instead, they reduced themselves to nothing. You walked free while they chained themselves to an impossible fantasy, and that is how obsession eats its own host. Number 4, their war against you was really a war against God. They thought it was a personal fight, a grudge they could settle in whispers, plots, or schemes. They believed their issue was with you, a single person they could intimidate, manipulate, or break down. But your existence isn't ordinary. It's covenantal. You're not just walking through life with talent or resilience. You're walking under an agreement much older and bigger than you. Every move you make, every breath you take, every step on your path is wrapped in a layer of protection they can't see but can feel. And because they can't see it, they miscalculated. They assumed the blows they threw would hit you directly. But each one ricocheted back, colliding with a force they didn't believe was real. This is why their attacks felt endless, but never landed the way they wanted. They weren't just plotting against a person, they were stepping into a collision with the very principle of justice that governs the universe. Your life carries a frequency that connects to eternity. And trying to sabotage you is like trying to sabotage a current of electricity with bare hands. They thought it was your strength they were fighting, but it was God's law of cause and effect, sowing and reaping, protection and recompense. The madness crept in when they started to see the pattern. They noticed their plans backfiring. They watched the traps they set for you close in on themselves. They saw their reputation crumbling while yours stayed intact. And slowly the realization hit them. They weren't fighting you, they were fighting something too vast to comprehend. That realization is a heavy burden to carry because it means there is no victory left for them to win. It means every ounce of energy spent hating you was a war against an unshakable order they cannot overpower. That's the unspoken truth about chosen ones. People think hurting you is as simple as hurting anyone else, but every dart thrown travels through a covenant that automatically reverses the impact. It's not luck, it's law. And once they realize it, madness follows, because the mind cannot process what it refuses to believe, yet experiences over and over again. They didn't pick a fight with you, they picked a fight with eternity. And eternity always wins. Number 5, they mistook access for authority. They mistook access for authority. Being able to peek into your life made them think they had some kind of power over it. Because they could watch you, track you, gather details about you, or talk about you, they assumed they were in control. But access is not the same as ownership, and obsession is not the same as power. They were like people staring through a window and convincing themselves they owned the house. The illusion of control fed their ego for a while, but reality never agreed with their fantasy. This is why their actions kept escalating. They thought that by collecting more information, spreading more stories, or keeping closer tabs on you, they could influence your direction. But they were only standing on the outside, trying to manipulate something they had no legal, spiritual, or moral claim to. The more they tried to push the boundary, the more frustrated they became. They mistook their proximity to your life as proof of their significance in it. And that false sense of significance is exactly what broke them when it finally crumbled. True authority can't be gained by spying, gossiping, or meddling. Authority is either granted or inherited, and they had neither. That's why their plans didn't stick. That's why their control never actually changed your destiny. The harder they tried to exercise power they didn't have, the more powerless they felt. That feeling of powerlessness for someone obsessed with control is like a slow suffocation. It eats at the mind until paranoia and desperation take over. What's happening to them now isn't random, it's the natural consequence of mistaking a seat in the audience for a role on the stage. They were spectators pretending to be directors, and when their directions weren't followed, they couldn't handle the truth. That's where their madness began. They were never in control of you. They were only in control of how far they'd let their obsession go. And because they refused to see the difference, they ended up destroying their own peace. Their surveillance gave them data, but it never gave them destiny. They had access, but they never had authority, and that's why they're unraveling. Number 6, they fed on your energy until withdrawal made them sick. They fed on your energy until withdrawal made them sick. It started small in ways you couldn't even see. Little manipulations, subtle demands, conversations designed to pull your focus. Drama crafted to siphon your attention. Every time you showed up with empathy, strength, or light, they took a little more. And because you're a chosen one, your energy isn't ordinary. It carries weight, clarity, and spiritual vitality. To someone empty, that kind of energy feels like oxygen. At first it looks like admiration or attachment, but underneath it's dependency. They weren't just drawn to you, they were feeding off you. What they didn't understand is that this kind of feeding isn't sustainable. It's not a fair exchange. It's an addiction. And like any addiction, it creates tolerance. The more they drained, the more they needed. Your presence became their high, your light their fix, your kindness their supply. They began building their moods, their sense of self, even their strategies around your energy. They got used to the ease of pulling from you instead of building from themselves. That's why they panicked when you pulled back, or when God hid you. Suddenly their supply dried up. The depression, paranoia, and rage they're feeling now aren't random. They're withdrawal. Without your energy to lean on, they have to face their own emptiness. Without your light to fill their darkness, they're left with what they tried to avoid all along, their own shadow. The sickness they're experiencing is the cost of refusing to develop their own power while living off yours. It's not a curse, it's the consequence of spiritual dependency. This is why some people seem to unravel after you distance yourself. They thought you were just a person they could lean on or exploit, but in truth, you were a lifeline to something higher. And when that lifeline was cut, all the suppressed darkness rushed in. That's the risk of feeding off someone else's essence, instead of cultivating your own. They thought draining you would make them stronger, but it only made them weaker. And now the withdrawal is teaching them the lesson they refused to learn while you were still present. Number 7, they tried to humiliate you and ended up publicly exposed. They tried to humiliate you and ended up publicly exposed. That's the irony of their obsession. It blinded them to their own footprints. In their rush to see you embarrassed, they forgot how much attention they were drawing to themselves. Every lie they told, every rumor they spread, every plan they tried to execute left behind a trail. They assumed they were clever enough to stay hidden, but obsession makes people sloppy. They repeated themselves, they used the same tactics, they left fingerprints where they thought they wore gloves, and now, instead of you being the spectacle, they've become the main show. Humiliation was their weapon of choice because they thought shame would weaken you. They underestimated the fact that chosen ones grow through adversity. Every attempt to drag your name down only gave your character more visibility and your resilience more evidence. Meanwhile, the cracks in their own image began to widen. Their friends started noticing the inconsistencies. Their allies saw the manipulation. People they thought were blind began connecting the dots. The stage they built to disgrace you has turned into a stage where they're being unmasked. This is the social side of their madness. It's not just that they're unraveling internally, it's that everyone else can see it. Their attempts to orchestrate your downfall became a public confession of their obsession. Even people who once believed them now see the desperation in their actions. That's the thing about trying to destroy someone covered by a higher order. The light always shifts back, revealing who's been working in the dark. Now their reputation is the one being questioned. Their credibility is eroding. Their stories don't match up. Their alliances are breaking apart. The humiliation they planned for you has become their own mirror. They wanted to script your downfall, but instead wrote their public undoing. And there's no reversing it because exposure is irreversible once the truth is out. They thought they were playing chess, but their obsession made them play checkers, and now every move is visible. In the end, the only person they truly humiliated was themselves. Number 8. They couldn't accept that you're unpredictable. They couldn't accept that you're unpredictable. Their entire plan for controlling you depended on you being predictable, on you reacting the way they expected, moving the way they predicted, and living according to a pattern they could chart and manipulate. That's how control works. It thrives on predictability. But chosen ones don't move according to human logic. You're guided by divine timing, and divine timing doesn't fit into anyone's schedule or scheme. Each time you acted outside their projections, each time you took a step they didn't foresee, it chipped away at the fantasy of power they had built in their head. This unpredictability didn't just frustrate them, it destabilized them. They had built an entire mental map of who they thought you were, how you would respond, and where you were going. And every time you refused to match that map, they had to redraw it. But obsession can't tolerate chaos. It feeds on the illusion of order. So every unexpected move you made cracked their control a little more. It wasn't just that they didn't understand you, they started to realize they couldn't understand you because you weren't operating on their frequency at all. That's where the unraveling began. For people obsessed with control, unpredictability feels like a personal attack. They start reading meaning into everything, imagining plots where there are none and seeing threats in your freedom. Their frustration grows into paranoia because they can't anticipate your next step. And when paranoia mixes with obsession, it creates madness. They become consumed not only with what you're doing, but also with the terror of not knowing what you'll do next. What they fail to grasp is that your unpredictability isn't chaos, it's purpose. It's what keeps you ahead, protected and untouchable. They mistook your divine guidance for randomness, and their minds couldn't process how you kept slipping through their calculations. That inability to predict you revealed their lack of real power. They weren't orchestrating your life, they were merely guessing at it. And every wrong guess eroded their confidence until their obsession turned on itself. In the end, it wasn't just your freedom that drove them mad. It was their inability to cage what was never meant to be caged. Number 9, they hated you because you proved their efforts powerless. They hated you because you proved their efforts powerless. This is deeper than simple jealousy or resentment. It's the rage of someone who has invested everything into your downfall only to watch you keep rising. They threw gossip, sabotage, manipulation, and even dark spiritual tactics at you, believing something, anything, would stick. But every attempt fizzled out, every plan backfired, every lie lost its grip. It's not just that you survived, you thrived in plain sight. That repeated failure wasn't just frustrating for them, it became a mirror they couldn't avoid. Each new scheme they built was supposed to be the one that finally worked. Each rumor was supposed to ruin you. Each manipulation was supposed to derail you, and yet no matter how hard they pushed, you kept moving forward. To someone obsessed with controlling outcomes, that's not just discouraging, it's identity-shattering. Their sense of power, intelligence, and influence was tied to the idea that they could shape your fate. But your resilience dismantled that illusion piece by piece until it became unbearable to look at themselves. This is why their hatred feels so intense. It's not only about you, it's about what you represent to them. Proof that their power is an illusion. Proof that their strategies are weak. Proof that their darkness can't outlast your light. Every time you rose, it revealed something about them they didn't want to see, their impotence. That's why it eats at them so deeply. They're not just hating you, they're hating the version of themselves reflected back at them when their efforts fail. And that reflection is permanent now. You've become the living evidence of their defeat. Even when you say nothing, even when you do nothing, your continued success is like a silent testimony of their wasted energy. It's a constant reminder that their will isn't sovereign over your life. That's the kind of reality that can break someone who thrives on control. It's not only the failure that stings, it's the pattern of failure that has turned into their shadow. They didn't just lose to you. They lost to the truth that your destiny isn't in their hands, and that truth is the mirror they can't escape. Number 10, they turned you into their religion without realizing it. They turned you into their religion without even realizing it. What began as simple fascination became ritual. They started following you more closely than they followed their own goals. They spoke about you more than they spoke about themselves. They watched, analyzed, and obsessed until your name, your moves, your life became their daily meditation. You stopped being just a person in their eyes. You became a fixation, a kind of living altar they returned to over and over. But because their obsession lacked reverence, it curdled into something dark. Worship without respect always becomes toxic. They began to pattern their days around you, checking for updates, talking about you to others, inventing narratives to keep the obsession alive. They fed on your presence the way the devout feed on prayer, but without the humility or self-awareness that makes devotion transformative. Instead of finding peace, they found agitation. Instead of gaining wisdom, they spiraled deeper into confusion. You became their focus, but not their healing, and in that, their fixation became a kind of self-inflicted torment. This is why their behavior seems almost religious but feels unhinged. Real worship uplifts and refines. False worship drains and destroys. They weren't seeking understanding, they were seeking control. They weren't honoring your light, they were trying to harness it. That's why the fixation couldn't stay neutral. It had to turn bitter, because their motives were rooted in envy, entitlement, and hunger for something they couldn't have. Over time, your name became a kind of prayer on their lips, not of gratitude but of resentment. They built rituals around you, yet every ritual pulled them further from themselves. They were imitating the structure of faith but missing the spirit behind it. And when there's no spirit, obsession becomes a cage. That's why they're unraveling now. They tried to make you their God without the reverence a God demands, and the cost of that is madness. You didn't ask to be their altar. You simply lived your life. But your light exposed the emptiness of their own, and instead of building their own power, they built a shrine to yours. They weren't worshipping you, they were worshipping their idea of you, and that's why their devotion has become their undoing. Number 11, they became prisoners of the fantasy they built about you. They became prisoners of the fantasy they built about you. In their mind, they constructed a version of you that fit their narrative, a rival to compete with, an enemy to fight, a target to destroy. This false version of you wasn't grounded in reality. It was stitched together from their fears, envy, assumptions, and projections. It gave them a sense of purpose, a storyline to justify their obsession, but fantasies, no matter how elaborate, can't hold up against reality. And the wider the gap grew between who you actually are and who they imagined you to be, the more their mind began to fracture under the weight of it. This is the silent cost of obsession. It demands constant maintenance. They had to keep reinforcing their illusion of you with lies, gossip, or manipulative stories because the real you kept disproving their narrative. You kept acting with dignity, moving forward and thriving, while their fantasy version of you was supposed to be weak, petty, or defeated. That contradiction gnawed at them. Every time reality contradicted the character they'd built in their head, it created a kind of cognitive dissonance, a mental tension that grows unbearable over time. They weren't just living with that dissonance, they were feeding it. Each new attempt to tear you down was another way of trying to make reality match their illusion, but it never did. You kept being you, and their fantasy kept crumbling. That's why their behavior became erratic. That's why they seemed to spiral. They were trying to keep a false world alive, and it was eating them from the inside out. In the end, they built a prison with their own hands, a cell lined with lies, assumptions, and projections, and then locked themselves inside it. You didn't have to punish them, expose them, or even engage with them. The fantasy they created became their punishment. Their inability to let go of the false image of you became their madness. They were so invested in defeating a version of you that never existed that they lost track of reality entirely. And now the only thing left for them to face is the truth they've been running from. You were never the enemy. The enemy was the illusion they built and believed. Number 12. They thought watching you would teach them your power. They thought watching you would teach them your power. They genuinely believed that if they observed you closely enough, your choices, your habits, your speech, even the smallest details of how you move through life, they could replicate what you carry. They treated your gift like a formula, a set of steps to memorize and copy. But what they failed to understand is that true power isn't learned, it's inherited. It's not a skill you pick up through observation, it's a calling that comes with a cost they've never paid. This is the mistake of those who envy chosen ones. They see the results but not the process, the light but not the fire that forged it. They assume if they mimic your style, they'll get your substance. But style is only the outer garment of a deeper authority. You can wear someone else's coat, but you can't wear their soul. The more they copied, the more hollow they felt, because mimicry without essence only highlights the emptiness inside. Instead of gaining your power, they were confronted with their lack of it. And this is where obsession turns cruel. What was supposed to be a shortcut to greatness became a mirror reflecting their disqualification. Every time they tried to imitate your moves, it rang false. Every time they borrowed your language, it lacked the weight and timing that made yours authentic. They weren't just failing, they were exposing themselves. The more they studied you, the more obvious it became that what you carry isn't transferable. It's the result of inner battles, unseen sacrifices, and divine selection. That realization is devastating for someone whose identity depends on control. It's one thing to be envious. It's another to realize you can never be what you're envying because you were never appointed for it. That's why their obsession grew darker. Watching you didn't empower them. It reminded them of the gap between imitation and inheritance. And that gap, if stared at too long, breeds resentment, despair, even madness. They weren't just trying to learn from you, they were trying to take what isn't theirs. And instead of gaining it, they discovered a hard truth. You can copy a move, but you can't copy a mantle. Number 13, they wanted to break you, but you exposed their fragility. They wanted to break you, but you exposed their fragility. Their entire plan revolved around applying pressure, planting chaos, and creating circumstances they thought you couldn't withstand. They believed if they could hit you hard enough and often enough, through rumors, sabotage, manipulation, or isolation, you would collapse. They were banking on your weakness, on the assumption that your strength was an act, a facade they could shatter. But instead of watching you fold, they ended up revealing the hollowness of their own foundation. Each attack you endured and survived became a mirror reflecting their own instability. Every time you stood up after being pushed, every time you continued to grow despite their interference, it stripped away their image of power. They saw you endure pain they couldn't even imagine, and it unsettled them. Their whole sense of superiority depended on believing they had the ability to crush you, and your resilience proved otherwise. That proof didn't just frustrate them, it unraveled them, because now they had to face a truth they never prepared for. The person they were trying to break was stronger than they were, and their methods were weaker than they believed. And here's the deeper layer. They weren't just trying to expose your vulnerability. They were projecting their own. They thought if they could shatter you, they could silence the evidence of their own fragility. But instead, their attempts became a public display of it. They cracked under the same pressure they tried to create for you. The traps they set became their own undoing. The energy they spent trying to destroy you became a drain on their stability. What they didn't realize is that true strength isn't about appearing untouchable. It's about surviving what should have destroyed you. And every time you survived, you exposed how weak they really are under the same weight. They wanted your collapse to validate their power, but your survival invalidated their whole identity. That's why their obsession has turned to bitterness. You didn't just resist them, you revealed them. They discovered the harshest truth of all. Their power wasn't in breaking you. It was only in the illusion that they could, and illusions always crack under reality. Number 14. Their madness is the evidence that you were untouchable. Their madness is the evidence that you were untouchable. The irony of it is brutal and undeniable. If they truly had the power to destroy you, they would have done it without hesitation. They tried everything. Plots, slander, manipulation, even spiritual attacks, but each move failed, and every failure chipped away at their own sanity. They're unraveling not because you harmed them, but because they're being confronted by the undeniable proof that you were never in danger. Their madness has become the receipt, the tangible evidence that you were always protected, while they were always exposed. What breaks a person like that isn't just defeat, it's realization. It's one thing to try and fail. It's another thing entirely to discover that you were never a real threat to the person you were trying to destroy. That truth is corrosive. It eats at their pride, their ego, and their sense of control. They start to realize that the hours they spent obsessing, planning, and strategizing were a complete waste because you were untouchable from the start. That's not just frustrating, it's humiliating. And humiliation, when sustained, becomes madness. Every sleepless night they've had, every conspiracy they've whispered about, every frantic attempt to win against you has only highlighted that they were battling something far bigger than their own schemes. They weren't fighting a person, they were fighting divine protection, timing and calling. They've been throwing stones at a fortress and wondering why the walls didn't even crack. That level of futility bends a mind. It makes even the most composed person spiral because nothing they're doing works the way they expect. And now, the madness isn't just a private struggle, it's a public marker. People can see it in their eyes, their behavior, their inconsistencies. It's like the universe stamped them with a label. You tried to touch what you couldn't. Their unraveling has become your vindication. You don't even have to defend yourself. Their breakdown is your proof. It shows everyone who was really protected, who was really chosen, and who was really in danger the whole time. Their madness isn't random. It's the consequence of realizing the power they thought they had over you never existed at all. What all of this reveals is a brutal but liberating truth. Every scheme, every obsession, every shadowy move they plotted was never really about you. It was about their own war with the light you carry. They mistook access for authority and obsession for ownership. They tried to study your power, copy your moves, drain your energy, and fracture your spirit. Yet every attempt only exposed their fragility and highlighted your untouchability. Their madness, their breakdowns, their public unraveling aren't just consequences. They're evidence. Evidence that you survived. Evidence that you were always protected. Evidence that the mantle on your life cannot be replicated, hijacked, or destroyed. In the end, their obsession became their undoing. Their attempts to humiliate you turned into their own exposure. Their surveillance became their prison. Their fixation became their addiction. And when withdrawal hit, it was not you who broke, it was them. What they thought would be the story of your downfall has become the story of their collapse. And it's not karma, it's not luck. It's the natural order of spiritual law. You cannot destroy what's been appointed. You can only destroy yourself trying. So stand tall in what you carry. You don't have to prove your strength. Their unraveling already has. You don't have to announce your protection. Their madness is your receipt. This season of your life isn't just vindication, it's confirmation. Confirmation that your survival wasn't accidental, your resilience wasn't random, and your light wasn't fragile. It's proof that the covenant on your life is real. And from this point forward, your story will no longer be about who tried to break you. but about how you emerged as living evidence that chosen ones don't just survive, they reveal, they expose, and they endure. If this message resonated with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the truth that others are too blind to see. Like this video if it opened your eyes. Comment below to share your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because the light we carry isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to be seen. Stay connected, stay awakened, and remember, what they tried to destroy only made you untouchable.